Good morning, Friendly Hills Church. Wanted to share some thoughts this morning as we're all quarantined, or at least out of our regular rhythms. I might be the only person I know of for whom the first book of the Bible that I read through and was really impacted by was Ecclesiastes. The book of Ecclesiastes, early in my faith walk, had imprinted a significant influence on the way that I think about the world. So I want to read a section of Ecclesiastes, and I think that with some reflection, it could be really helpful for us in this season. This is Ecclesiastes chapter 3, starting in verse 16. Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness, and in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and for every work. I said in my heart with regard to the children of man that God is testing them, that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beasts is the same as one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage of the beasts, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and to dust all return. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down to the earth? So I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? Now that's some bleak perspective, and there is an interpretation of Ecclesiastes that sees almost the entire book as the wrong perspective, except for a few sections, and that really Ecclesiastes is designed to set us up as a contrast of what reality would look like without Christ. Now, there are really good biblical interpreters that hold that view. My understanding is Tremper Longman, really good Old Testament scholar, holds that view. Personally, I think that view of Ecclesiastes lacks some sophistication and lacks some of the depth that this book brings to the table. I don't think we're supposed to read statements like all is vanity and all go to the same place as if the only purpose of them is to give us the view that is apart from Jesus. I actually think that we're supposed to read those statements and feel their sting. We're supposed to look into the void that they create for us and shiver a little bit at the darkness. But the last statement is significant. It says, "So I saw that there's nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. For who can bring him to see what will be after him?" See, what the author of Ecclesiastes shows us are the kind of things that we're also reminded of in seasons like the outbreak of the coronavirus. The author of Ecclesiastes is reminding us that the things that we spend a lot of our energy on in this world are actually quite fragile. And we all face a reality that'll pull us all to the same perspective. And from a biblical perspective, we understand that it brings us all before God and that none of us have an advantage in that way. Jesus says similar things in his own teaching. He tells a story about a man who stores up money, stores up savings for the future, and after he got them all stored up, the guy died, and none of it went with him. But the author of Ecclesiastes does give us some hope. One, he puts us in this perspective of eternity. He puts us in perspective, and he levels us with regard to our arrogance. So if somebody in a poor lot in life read this, what would happen is they would actually be encouraged. They would be lifted up, and they would think, okay, I'm suffering, but I'm not the only one. Everybody's going to have their time of suffering. The person who is doing well in life, it brings them low, and it tells them, don't rest on this. It's not forever. All we really have to do is look at the life of celebrities oftentimes to see that reality. But we can also look to the epistle of James with more authority and see that James tells us the same thing. He says, poor people among you, rejoice, you'll be exalted. Rich people among you, humble yourselves, for you'll be brought low. And the author of Ecclesiastes also gives us another hope for the day, and that is, so I saw, verse 22, so I saw that there's nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. In other words, most of the time we spend worrying about setting ourselves up for a secure future, as important as it is, and as biblical as it is within perspective, ultimately, all we have is the present moment, followed by present moment, followed by present moment. The poet T.S. Eliot says that time past and time present, what might have been and what has been, so times past and times future, what might have been and what has been point to one end, which is always present. In other words, faith puts us constantly in the present. Mark Twain, I believe it was, one time said that in his old age that he suffered a great deal, and most of it never happened. In other words, most of our problems are in our minds, and they're worries about the past and worries about the future. But faith constantly calls us to look to the present moment and walk through that present moment with Jesus Christ. So I also want to look at a proverb, two proverbs that give us a similar perspective. The first is in Proverbs 15. Proverbs 15 verse 13 says, a glad heart makes a cheerful face, but by sorrow of heart the spirit is crushed. By sorrow of heart the spirit is crushed. In other words, a cheerful face can endure more things than those that happen outside of it. And a crushed spirit, we could say a pessimistic internal spirit, no matter what happens outside of them, feel dejected. In other words, there's a type of person that always sees the bleak side of things, always finds something to complain about, and there's a type of person who, because of joy, because of inner contentment, can endure all sorts of bad situations. This is what Paul's talking about when he says, don't be anxious for anything, but in prayer and supplication and with thanksgiving, present your request to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus. This is also the real meaning of Philippians 4:13. We often hear it like in a Tim Tebow way, and I'm not saying Tim Tebow misunderstands the verse, but oftentimes we see this verse in sports. This idea that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me is applied oftentimes to mean I can win a Super Bowl if Jesus is helping me. But really what that passage is talking about is contentment with all circumstances. Paul says, I've been in good positions in my life, and I've been brought low. And in all of those situations, I can walk through them, I can endure them through Christ who strengthens me. In fact, Paul wrote those words from a prison cell. And so this is what the Bible's reminding us of. And lastly, I want to look at chapter 18 of Proverbs. Verse 14, a man's spirit will endure sickness, but a crushed spirit who can bear? So, same idea here. A man's spirit can endure sickness, but a crushed spirit who can bear? Joy, especially, and ultimately only the joy of Jesus can get us through anything. And without Jesus, we ultimately can't fully enjoy anything. And seasons like this remind us of that reality. And I want to look at one last passage. In fact, this was the passage that I intended to look at earlier. And then another one, I looked at another verse that brought in the same point. They're clustered together. But chapter 15, verse 17 says, better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a fattened ox and hatred with it. So this is applicable to us as we all try to scavenge the raided grocery stores. He's saying, I'll put it in our perspective, in our time, it's better to have the joy of Jesus Christ and not be able to find milk at the grocery store than to have a full platter and be miserable. So those are the thoughts that I want to leave us with. I just want to encourage us to glean from what literary scholars call the speculative wisdom. That's what Ecclesiastes is. There's proverbial wisdom. That's the Proverbs that gives us pithy statements, riddles to ponder. But there's also the speculative wisdom. Ecclesiastes and Job fall into these categories. And the speculative wisdom pushes us to hold up before us the more challenging realities of life and to look them square in the face and even let ourselves tremble a little bit. And then when we do that, it pushes away the false securities and makes us stand on the rock of Jesus. So I want to give us that at the same time kick to the gut and encouragement this morning from the book of Ecclesiastes and from Proverbs, and remind us that not to minimize at all the difficult things that are happening right now with the coronavirus, all of the fear and all of that. It truly is evil. It truly is bad what's happening. But at the same time, there's a sense in which going through these seasons actually do bring us back to perspective. Take, for example, one thing, and that is how enjoyable it is and almost how much we appreciate simple things like being able to stream our worship services through the computer. And there's a kind of unity and camaraderie that comes around that, because what happens is the comforts that we take for granted, when they get stripped away, we get back to the basics and we realize how much we appreciate the basics. So I don't at all want to minimize the difficulty of this season. The author of Ecclesiastes would not have. Paul and his epistles would not have. But I do want to say, let these seasons bring us back to the basics. Let them remind us of the scaffolding that we have built on sand, so that we can go back to building our lives upon the rock of Jesus Christ.